There we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Who have we got with us today? Other than Ryan and not Jesse yet. We'll be getting started in about 2 or 3 minutes. Just wait for some stragglers to join in. Then Ryan and Jesse are going to steal the show and spend about half an hour walking us through sponsorships and ads for newsletters, this masterclass, and then I'm going to jump back in and we'll do some Q&A, and I'm sure Ryan and Jesse will be very happy to help with any questions and any any feedback that you have. How are you doing today, Jesse? Oh, sorry, Ryan, obviously. Jesse.
Doing great. We've got some snow coming down here in New York, so another cold, snowy day.
Yeah, it's crazy what's happening over there.
Texas, I guess, has it worse right now, so it's unusual.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess that can be Jesse's excuse. Oh, there we go. Jesse, can you hear us? Right, we're going to wait another minute or two to get started while we wait for the stragglers. While we're doing that, I'll be in the chat. So if you have any questions, anything you want more clarity on as we go through, or as Ryan and Jesse go through, just stick it in the chat as we go, and I will flag it as a question, and we'll make sure to come back to it at the end after the 30 minutes or so of the masterclass are done. In the meantime, here's a quick poll to see where people are, so that we know where to spend the time. So if people want to fill that out, that would be awesome. And I think Ryan and Jesse, we're going to be good to go in about a minute or so, right?
Great.
Yeah. I'll give it just another minute just to see if Jesse can get his audio up and running. And otherwise, I think, Ryan, you're the solo star of the show. No pressure.
No worries. We can answer everything either way.
Is that the ideal setup for you guys? You doing the talking and Jesse looking pretty?
Exactly. That's how we divide it up.
The eye candy. Okay, yeah. That's Manuel on our team. Don't worry about it. Awesome. So we have some people who are struggling a bit with sponsorships, some getting started, and some who aren't doing it yet but are interested in it. So it's a good mix of everyone. Nice to see. Yeah, there will be a recording available. It'll be sent out sometime this week. If you signed up for the masterclass, then that will be sent out within the next couple of days for sure. Great. Then should we get going?
All set.
Brilliant. Well, Jesse, Ryan, thanks so much for being here. We are going to go through, or you're going to take us through about half an hour's worth of stuff that everyone needs to know if they're trying to find sponsors and build a successful, profitable business on top of newsletters and newsletter sponsorships. Obviously, this is, I think, going to be super useful for everyone who's here. I'm super excited to learn more about it. Why don't you just jump in?
Sure. So I'm Ryan Sager, and my partner is Jesse Watkins. We run Email Revenue Solutions. And so basically, just to give you a little background on us, my background is from media, Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, and I went from building editorial operations there to building something at a company called Ladders, which does sort of high-end job search. And we built a site there about the future of work. And part of what we did there to monetize that was we had a fairly large daily newsletter, which went out to about 1 million subscribers. And what we did over the course of a few years there is we turned that into sort of a machine to sell direct sponsorships of that newsletter, sort of the typical sponsorship slot you see, a logo and a sponsored news item. And by the time that was cranking, that was about 2 million plus in business a year in direct email sponsorship sales. And so after we left Ladders, Jesse and I decided to start revenue solutions to help independent publishers do this kind of direct sales, people who have nice audiences built up, but are maybe before the stage where they have a 3-person sales team. So we come out as a outside sales solution and sell ads for those publishers as on a commission-only basis as an outside sales team. And so that's all by way of background, saying that we're in the trenches. We are doing these kinds of sponsorship sales for lots of different publishers of different sizes, sort of day in and day out. And who sponsors stuff, the product we're launching next week is actually an internal tool we've been using to track who is sponsoring stuff, who's been sponsoring newsletters, tracking about 100 plus newsletters, and keeping that organized, and then getting direct contact information for the right person to reach out to at those companies. And so we've been using that internally, but thought it would actually be a super useful tool to start offering to newsletter publishers, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But now let's just dive in. Today we're going to be covering a few things about sponsorships, 5 topics: how to position your newsletter, how to price it, how to identify potential sponsors, how to reach out to them, and then how to manage your ad inventory. So now, taking it from the very top, if you've got a newsletter and you're thinking about what you want to do with it, how to make money off of it, what its purpose is for you in a business sense, plenty of people are just doing a newsletter because it raises their profile in their industry. Maybe you're in the nonprofit world and you run a newsletter about nonprofits, and then people hire you for your consulting services. That's fine. Not everybody has to sell sponsorships. Sometimes it's just for influence. Then there's people who are providing really valuable information that a small audience values a lot, and then maybe you should be selling a membership. So, first of all, you have to think about why you're selling a sponsorship. And so, assuming you're here today, you're very interested in selling sponsorships, so let's talk about that. So the thing to ask yourself as you're considering monetizing this way is, why would a sponsor, why would an advertiser want to sponsor your newsletter versus all the other newsletters in the world, or other acquisition channels like social, if they're spending on Facebook or Instagram or Reddit or Pinterest? Why is your newsletter in particular interesting to them? And so that's going to come down to a few things: your audience size, your niche, and sort of the buying intent of your audience, how strong that buying intent is. For a branding play, like if you're Chase Bank and you just want to reach millions of millennial women, well, then you're probably going to buy on something like the Skim and get their 7 million users, and those typically, unless you are one of those huge players, you're probably not playing in this branding space. So it's really going to come down to kind of how focused your audience is, how focused the topic of your newsletter is, and then sort of a equation of your audience size plus how focused you are is going to tell the advertiser how likely that is to push people to buy from them. So again, to back up, email advertisers are generally not doing big branding plays. This isn't TV to exist, and McDonald's is running 1 million ads so that when you're hungry you think of McDonald's. That's not the kind of thing that most people are going to be able to sell as a newsletter publisher. So put aside any ideas of that you can do branding unless you're huge. And so email advertisers are really going to be very performance focused. They want to buy newsletter spots that are going to help them directly acquire customers and make sales. So your newsletter ultimately has to offer a pretty attractive cost per click through to the sponsor's website, or cost per acquisition down their funnel for acquiring a customer. So at the end of the day, your ad really has to be attractive. It's usually, you're going to want to do like a pretty native format, not a banner ad, and it has to be designed to drive clicks. And so, just a quick anatomy of an ad. We've all seen these, just taking from Flipboard's 10 for Today product, just as an example, but this is obviously very similar to what you see in Morning Brew, the Skim, and hundreds of other newsletters that are selling sponsorships. You're going to want to usually offer a big logo placement at the top, and have that be clickable, and then something lower down where You're going to have a pretty native looking ad that's going to look like the rest of your content blocks, except labeled that it's promoted or sponsored by the brand, because you do, it's important that you be transparent, that you're not just running something organically when you're actually getting paid for it. You want to label your sponsored content. And so that should really be built for click-through and really to drive traffic to their site. Again, so Flipboard's 10 for today lists 10 content articles, editorially chosen articles, and so this is meant to look very similar. It's got the curiosity gap headline. What are these 7 secrets for people who retire comfortably? The user wants to click through if they're interested in their financial health and retirement prospects. And Smart Asset hopes a lot of them click through and see their content and eventually sign up. There's also, so we would call the last one I just showed you a primary sponsorship. This is sort of a secondary sponsorship that you see in a lot of newsletters lower down, where whether it's just a second ad unit that's a little smaller, or whether it's something like skim picks, where a bunch of them are, I think all of these are sponsored, and again, you want to label that. These are sort of secondary ad placements. For people just starting out, I would really recommend against secondary placements. We just generally tell people to do your primary and get that inventory filled first. You don't want to give a big menu of options to a sponsor. You just want to give them one thing to choose to make everything super simple. And then if you've filled that inventory and you find yourself booked up for the next 3 months, then sure, then think about adding some secondary units to squeeze a little more juice out of each newsletter. And a bonus tip for people getting started on sponsorship sales. I've talked to a lot of smaller newsletters, and don't overlook your own audience. A lot of times your first sponsor will come through just putting a call out in your newsletter. Hey, do you want to sponsor this? And the people who are super interested in your space may already be in your audience, and you have a good chance of getting a response to that. So pricing. This comes up a ton. This is a confusing area for people. It's the toughest to sort of disentangle, being shy about asking for too much or making sure you're charging enough. So what is your newsletter worth to an advertiser? And so there's a couple ways to arrive at that, but they'll all boil down to some extent to your list size, the open rate you're getting on your list, and then how kind of successful is your ad spot, how many people click on the ads. Again, these are super performance-based people who are looking at your sponsorships. So, sorry, this is a little bit about math here, but one way of pricing is CPM, or cost per mil, cost per thousand. That's where you take your list size, you divide it by 1,000, that times the CPM you're choosing is the ad rate. Now, a typical CPM that we would recommend to someone starting out is in the $5 to $10 range. And so just doing some quick math here, if you had 100,000 subscribers and you wanted to charge on the lower end of that, which I would recommend, a $5 CPM, your ad rate is then that 100,000 divided by 1,000, 100 times 5. That gives you, a ballpark that maybe $500 is not a crazy amount to charge for your space. Similarly, you can do a cost per click to do another kind of back of the envelope to see if the price you're thinking of makes sense. We're using a target CPC of $1 because we find that for most consumer products, that is roughly in range of what people will consider a good CPC is to get about $1. And so again, to do some quick math, say you had a 30% open rate on that 100K list, 30,000 people are opening per send. Say that about 2% of those are clicking on the sponsor link in a typical day. That means a sponsor on average can hope to get about 600 ad clicks at that target CPC of $1. $600 would not be a crazy price for a newsletter doing those kinds of numbers. So again, you can calculate both of these ways and see if you're coming to similar conclusions, and that will give you a sense that you're in the ballpark. And so key things to remember, always best to start on the lower end of that. Always think through what the sponsor's view of things are going to be and how much is a conversion worth to them, and do everything you can to make sure that the ad slots you're putting in your newsletter are getting clicks, and that they're optimized in the best way for clicks. Is the call to action, CTA button, prominent enough? Is the ad unit in a prominent enough place? Does it pop? Are the colors right? Getting 2x on the clicks you're bringing to a sponsor is going to make a big difference in what you can charge. And just to give you a sense of kind of CPMs, to go back to CPMs, we recommend starting out in that $5 to $10 range. Look, there's people on the high end of this, an Axios selling ad space to Facebook to, try to lobby Congress not to regulate it. They're probably paying in excess of $100 CPM. So CPMs can vary a lot, but it really has to be that you're offering something super valuable and super targeted. If you've got an audience that's all of startup founders, and you're selling and your potential sponsors are people who want to sell them expensive subscriptions or SaaS subscriptions, you may have the ability to go a little higher on your CPM if it's an audience with high buying intent, because your audience could be super valuable for conversions in that case. So start lower, but know that you may have some room to go up. And bonus tip on this section is that bulk pricing is a real trick to getting your program clicking and humming along. Once you've sold a test package of 1 or 2 runs to somebody, and if they've gotten good results, then you want to cut them a deal to do 10 runs. That keeps your inventory filled. It puts things on autopilot for a little while, so you can go back out there, keep finding even newer sponsors you could be using, or improving the product and doing the main thing you're here to do, which is run your newsletter. So identifying potential sponsors, which can be a pretty tricky part of all this. So 3 tips to that: define your space, understand exactly what it is you're selling in terms of what is the audience that you're selling to sponsors. Find your neighbors, who else is in this audience, what other newsletters exist, what other websites exist, what other popular Instagram accounts exist. Subscribe to everything, see who's advertising. And so this is where there are some directories that exist that can help you with this, both to find newsletters in your topic area, and you can list your own newsletter. And some sponsors are in these looking for people in their niche. And so there's a couple: Hecto, Letterwell, Letterhead. And then there's a tool like what we're building with Who Sponsors Stuff, where again, we're scraping 100 plus newsletters and categorizing the sponsors, what niches they're in, what kinds of audiences they're interested in. And again, we're in the trenches getting their direct contact information, dealing with them every day. And so what this product will do is give you kind of the right person at the company to reach out to, which can save a lot of time versus trying to go through info at company name or guessing about who's the right person to go to. And so again, a bonus tip on this section is this is a little trick we used a lot in our sales ladders, which is to harness the algorithm. When you follow, particularly found Instagram was a really good place to do this. I think it would work on Facebook too. And Facebook, of course, is picking up the same stuff when you do this on your Instagram account. But follow everything in your space on Instagram, even if it's just a meme account, not a real content account or another website or newsletter. Follow everything. Follow the stuff that Instagram then surfaces to you when you follow those sites, and your feed will just fill up with like lots of relevant advertisers who are at least spending money on social media. It doesn't tell you they're spending money on email. We do always recommend to target people who are spending specifically on email first, because it does tend to go a little smoother, but it'll sponsor some new brands you haven't heard of before. It'll surface some new brands you haven't heard of before in your social media field, and then just screenshot those during your day and then go look them up later. So reaching out to potential sponsors. The 3 things that will help you here are, again, it's finding the right person. Jesse and I, just in selling at ladders, the difference between kind of reaching out to the wrong person and being stuck somewhere in the belly of the company and getting kicked around for 3 or 6 months It's totally different than when you have the right contact information, you get to the right person first. That can just make a huge difference. 2, being persistent. You don't just send one email. You want to have kind of a drip where you follow up and follow up again. And that's not just being persistent with one advertiser, one sponsor. You really, you want to be casting a wide net. You want to be reaching out to 30, 50, depending on what you do, 100 sponsors, and have them hopefully in some sort of drip campaign. And then communicating your newsletter's value, you have to make sure you're pitching it right to really make sure they understand what you're offering them. And so again, you don't want to end up in this info company name. For the tiniest companies, that might go to the founder. So that can work, but it's generally not where you want to be with companies that have a lot of money to spend. Stalk them on LinkedIn, get in there on that LinkedIn page and check out the people and really figure out who's responsible for digital ad budgets and who can make a decision and pull the trigger. This is where I really do emphasize sort of mid-range and smaller brands as opposed to the Chase Banks of the world. The Chase Banks of the world are using an agency to buy, and so there's a whole agency gatekeeper set up to stop you from talking to decision makers, and agency RFP processes and request for proposal, and those are just really drawn out. Those can be 6 months, those can be a year. It's probably not what you want to be doing if you're here today. Being persistent, again, outreach is a numbers game. You can send 30 emails to 30 companies and have drip campaigns following up 3 times. That may yield 1 or 2 responses, and those may or may not turn into sales. So you really need some persistence, and you need a big list of companies to try with. And then again, communicating your value. Think like a sponsor. What is it that they can get out of you? Is your audience really big? Is your audience really engaged? Is your audience really focused on the topic that is core to their product? What is the fit there? And so little bonus tip here, especially if we're talking to a SparkLoop audience, partnering with other newsletters to do a swap or doing like a referral giveaway is a great way to start a conversation with a brand. You don't even have to start talking about sponsorships. Just start talking to them about, could you give us 10 sets of headphones in this case from Bose, something that we can give away to our users that all however many tens of thousands of users you have are going to see that this contest is going on. And it's a lot of impressions, a lot of eyeballs, and pretty cheap for the company to do. And it's a nice way to start off, and then later down the road, if that looks successful, then you can go and talk to them about sponsoring you instead of just doing the referral giveaway. And so just another last thought on kind of the persistence angle. Even if you're a one-person shop, you could invest in a lightweight customer relationship management system. This is something like a free version of HubSpot. It just automates the email reach out. You have a spreadsheet, you have kind of the first names of the contacts that you're reaching out to, their company names, and it auto-populates, dear first name at company X, and then, you can personalize some of the text inside of it, but it automates that process, and then you program the follow-up emails that you want to send, and then as people either open or click or respond to you, you can sort of pick out the best prospects from that outreach campaign and follow up with them. And so lastly, we'll just go through quickly how to manage your ad inventory once you start making some sales. And look, it's really simple what we advise people. Fill first, rates later. People can get really hung up on, we should be getting thousands of dollars per sponsorship. Maybe you should, but you really want to fill things first, send that signal to the marketplace that this ad spot is valuable, that somebody has bought this ad spot. The people in your audience don't know what the sponsor paid. They just know whether somebody is sponsoring it or not. So get to fill first, worry about bringing your rates up later. That hopefully leads to a virtuous cycle where you offer very reasonable rates, get that fill, then you can prove that your ad spot is getting lots of clicks, is effective for sponsors. You use those case studies from the first few sponsors to bring in other sponsors, hopefully at a little bit better price. do some bulk sales to the people who are getting good results, rinse and repeat. And so with that, I don't want to go on too long, and just want to get us to the Q&A part. And we are offering a special offer for anyone coming from SparkLoop who sponsors stuff, and additional 20% off our launch sponsorship, which is through the end of this month. And you have a link there and a discount code, which Lewis, I think, will pop into the chat or somewhere convenient. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Brilliant. There's a discount code, or the discount link is in the chat as we speak. It should have just popped up for everyone if they want to go and try that out. There's also that popped up before a 3-month trial of SparkLoop when you take our free referral university course. I think that one's gone now, but it'll be available in the replay. Awesome. So we have some great questions. Jesse, did you want to add anything at this point? Can do a game of
bases and get into it kind of in the Q&A.
Awesome. Okay, brilliant. So should we just go through the questions straight away? Sure. I'll pull up some and we can go through. So Ernie has a question. Ernie asks about thoughts on longer form editorial newsletters like his. So he says they're intended to be read in the inbox. He's got a very engaged audience, but they don't tend to click through on things very much. Have you got any ideas on tactics or things he can try to do to improve that so that he can get his, I'm guessing, so we can get the CPM up?
Right. So, there is definitely a difference. There's newsletters that are built for clicking, and there's newsletters that are built to be read in the inbox. But I think you'll even find that, newsletters that are built for the inbox, like Morning Brew to some extent is built to read it in the inbox, even though obviously there's lots of links out. It's built for that. As native as it can feel, if it's worked into the text, if you wrote a longer ad space that was sort of maybe again, you're going to want to flag everything, but maybe that is somewhere in the middle. There's a break where there's a more narrative, longer text instead of a usual ad spec will have maybe 100 words max. Maybe it should be a 500-word narrative that the company that you even help craft for the company, keeping it closer to your voice, which especially works if it's a product that's really good for your audience and that you kind of feel very comfortable. Not exactly endorsing. It's not quite it's a little bit like when the podcast sponsor reads out the text. So something that maybe feels like more of a text version of, the podcast sponsor reading the sponsor text.
Brilliant. That makes sense. And if you have any follow-ups, just stick them in the chat and we'll get to those in a second. John asks what your thoughts are on programmatic ads within newsletters. So there are solutions like Live Intent, and I've seen those that will basically you just add a snippet of something and it will populate with different ads, so you don't have to do any sales. Is the theory, at least. What's your experience with those?
We have used those. The rates are low. If you've looked into it, you know that. Look, nothing against the companies. I think they degrade the newsletter. Just personally, when I see them in a newsletter, I feel like this means there's been a failure of selling and a failure of imagination. You're going to get low rates, and they're not going to be a great experience for your users. That said, if it's the best you can do and it helps you monetize and stay in business, go with it.
Great. Then another question, John asks, is D2C the best consumer brand category to target because they're so focused on performance metrics?
I think for that, it really depends on the space that you're in, but generally, yeah, for what we did at Ladders, the direct-to-consumer brands were quick and easy wins, and we were able to get our calendar filled up with a lot of advertisers. Also, something I should note is that it is a small community of all these marketing directors at a lot of these D2C brands know each other. So once you get the ball rolling in that space, you could really get your fill rates up and then kind of network with each other to sort of see who's a good fit for the space, and they sort of become brand advocates as well. Yeah, I really like working with a lot of the DTC brands right now.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. Let's jump on. Or Ryan, did you have anything to add there?
No, I think that's true. DTC, exactly for the reasons you're saying, very performance focused, perfect for email.
Brilliant. So let's go to our next question. There was a question about bundling that we wanted to get to. Where's that? Here's one. So what would you say would be an ideal fill rate in the early days? I mean, I'm imagining obviously that 100% or 110% would be the best fill rate, but I mean, you know, maybe that's an interesting question that we could bring in, because I've thought about doing sponsorships on newsletters of my own before. I've never actually done it, but I've thought about it. And I've thought, well, if I'm going out to newsletters, to sponsors, and I don't have any advertisers in the newsletter already, should I just kind of fake it till I make it? Should I put, just ask someone if they want a free trial or something like that for a month, and then go out with that impressive brand name or something like that? Is that a sensible way to think about it? Does that do more harm than good?
I think that's great. I'll let Jesse take that though.
To start, I mean, what we did at Ladders is I brought everything out to market at a test rate. I sort of figured we had an idea of how many clicks we could generate, and we were pulling live intent out eventually once we were putting the sponsored slots in. But between like $1 to $2 CPC is fair. $1 CPC is plenty fair. I mean, if your audience is the right audience for that brand. But yeah, you could kind of figure out how many clicks you're going to generate, but I definitely wouldn't go out for free. I would just offer a heavily discounted test rate on a few different sends. You don't want to just do a one-off. Hey, you know what? Here, we'll do 5. This is what I'm going to charge for 1. I'll give you 5 for that rate. And then you get to see what their conversions look like, as well as the clicks that generated. I think that'd be a good way to start.
Awesome.
And I also, just to jump in, I think you could also do a newsletter swap in that sort of situation. Newsletters buy on other newsletters all the time. So again, the end user doesn't know whether that ad is paid or not, and so it can get you a click rate. You see, how many people clicked on that ad, and you can use that for future sales. And if you're swapping, you're at least getting that swap in return to hopefully pick up some subscribers from their audience.
Brilliant. And then there was a question around the idea of bundling. So obviously, like you said at the beginning, you tend to do kind of a test rate for 1 or 2 editions just to see how it's going and see if it's a good fit. Obviously, there's not too much commitment there on their side, so that's great. When it does come to bundling, how would you normally package that? Would you suggest going in based on the number of slots available, based on a monthly, like a time period thing? How would you approach that? What tends to be like a good bundle that sponsors will be expecting you to come to them with, like a pack of 10 a month, something like that?
When I crafted these test campaigns, when we were just starting the native ad slot at Ladders and just building it out, I had a good idea then, and the advertiser had a good idea. The way I did it was I sold test campaigns at a frequency of 3. So it'd be 3 sends for, maybe with a rate of what my rate card for 1 send would be. And I would schedule them like 2 weeks in a row, and then maybe a week. If I'm a daily newsletter, I would have them, 1 day of the week. Let's say I do 2 Tuesdays in a row, week off, then the 3rd week again on that Tuesday. And then we could kind of figure out how the audience converted on each of those sends. It gave the advertiser the opportunity to take a look and try different copies from each of those sends. Typically, they'd run the same copy for the first 2, and then it's going for the 3rd. And then you could also figure out what the right frequency mix is. So if I have a newsletter that's going out 5 days a week, I can fill a quarter with 20, 25 partners. You don't need a ton of partners if they're running at weekly frequency, and then some run at bi-weekly frequency. So that's just to back up on why the tests are kind of helpful. But then coming in, and now I'm sitting down, I'm talking to the random marketing campaigns for the brand, and you kind of get a look of, okay, here's where we hit our acquisition numbers. Here's what we can afford for 10 of them. And sometimes it can come up, it can come down, and then you could either sell in both units, like 10, 20, 10. But the way I would try to do it, and it would back out to that anyways, but I would try to fill a quarter. So everybody's re-upping every quarter. And the nice thing about doing it in quarters as opposed to every 6 months or year is it gets you have more touch points with the advertiser. You could check in monthly and see how things are going. And it gives you, good forecastability on if a partner is lagging towards the end of that quarter in their performance with your brand or your audience, you have the ability to go out and find, another replacement for them. So I recommend quarterly funding. Bundling was like the end goal for us.
Great. Ryan, anything to add there?
No, I think that's exactly what we want to do. And obviously things look different if you're running a weekly versus a daily. But a month for a weekly is always a pretty easy package to conceive of. Makes a lot of intuitive sense. So just sponsor January. That's an easy pitch.
Brilliant. Okay. Are there any questions from the audience? If you want to add some in there, that would be great. While we're waiting to see if any come in, a question that I have that I've heard people ask before is, I guess, kind of more of a practical one around just kind of payments and payment deadlines. So if you're maybe more new to this or you're approaching bigger sponsors for the first time, should you be asking for payment up front? Should you be doing a net 10, net 30? What's kind of best practice there? Obviously, if it's based on a CPC, then you have to do it retroactively, I guess, at least partly. But yeah, what's best practice there?
Make everything net 15, just to make it really simple. Some advertisers will push back and request net 30 or net 45, but there's no harm in just putting net 15 out on the insertion orders. And
I think we had a cutout. Jesse's. So what Jesse's saying, I would default to net 15 payments, and then if they push back, they push back. You'll want to have some very simple insertion order drawn up. Really doesn't have to have much legal language, just has to say X number of runs at X number of dollars in this date range, agree to pay it. And you don't have to, this isn't a contract heavy with legalese. This is a one-page, I agree to buy X runs, X dollars.
Awesome. And what about kind of after the or sharing like performance and results? What would you recommend sending over there, or what should be included? And I've seen a lot of people do kind of get their first deal and just be scared to send anything over or not know what details, what statistics to share. How should that be kind of packaged up together, and what should be what stuff do you want to be sharing, and how do you want to be framing it?
See if Jesse has his audio back. No. Okay.
You can see he's dying to answer it. It's just.
I know this is his world. So
this is torture. I'm sorry about this.
Basically, you just want to wait a week or so to make sure that you've got all the clicks in. Even on a daily newsletter, you'll see clicks keep coming in for a week or more, just as people go through their inboxes in their own quirky ways. And then you just really want to show them this was the open rate. This is how many sponsor clicks we saw. You can ask them what they saw on their end, because they'll usually obviously have their own data from their landing pages and their funnel. And look, it's a conversation. The best thing is just to kind of not be intimidated or scared. These folks are running these kinds of campaigns all the time, and they're happy to share. This is what we saw. A lot of people started the session, but not that many people signed up, or a lot of people signed up, and this is great. There's obviously a little bit of caginess. They don't want to tell you that, your newsletter is just a godsend to them, because they don't want to get the rates jacked up. But they'll honestly, we found them to be pretty honest, and you just want to you're always trying to come to an agreement that's mutually beneficial. You don't want to be overcharging them, and you don't want them to be getting a ridiculous deal that's a steal. So just basically, what is the click-through? That's what they want to know.
Got it. Okay, awesome. And unless any questions come in, I think this may be the last one that I have here, which is a question that came up a couple of times when I was talking to creators at SparkLoop about us putting on this masterclass together, was that they were saying, well, I have this newsletter and I started it off kind of as a side project, and all of a sudden I have 15, 20,000 subscribers, and I've never run sponsorships before. I've never done any ads before. I'm kind of worried how my audience would react if I started doing it, but also I'm not stupid. I know there's quite a lot of money to be made there, so I really would like to try it. Do you have any thoughts on the best way to approach it? Should people be nervous? Are there mistakes to avoid when, for the relationship with your audience when you run sponsorships for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I've just got to say, I've never really seen audiences push back that hard against advertising. I mean, people are pretty sophisticated. They're enjoying a free newsletter that you send them, and you've got bills to pay. So, I would say don't be shy about the fact that you've established, a great audience and brought together a valuable audience. You want it to be relevant. If you're super nervous, I mean, I think you want to make sure that it's something that is relevant to them. If you're running a newsletter for people who are involved in no code, building things in no code, that's where you're going to start, as opposed to sending them meal kit ads probably. But as long as what you're doing is pretty in line with what your audience is interested in, and especially when if the advertiser is creating a good CTA and a good discount, say, for your audience, getting to try some new product that's in your wheelhouse and getting a discount. I mean, that's, tends to be win-win for the audience. I mean, just as, I guess it goes without saying, but you say it, definitely transparency. You always, not just legally, but, in terms of audience trust, want to make very clear that something is a sponsored slot. But beyond that, it's not a violation of your audience's trust to run an ad. I haven't seen people push back hard against that. And when it's a good fit, you can even go further. I mean, we didn't get into this much in the main presentation, but kind of one of the most profitable products you can run is doing a dedicated partner email, which is where, in addition to your own newsletter sends, you do a send that's purely for the sponsor. And we actually did a lot of those successfully at Ladders, with particularly with some credit card offers, credit card companies. And you would think this might have annoyed the audience, but honestly, people signed up like crazy, and it did great conversions for the credit card companies. And it was a very profitable product. You can really bump the CPMs up on that when you've got when you're doing a dedicated send. I mean, if you're doing a dedicated send, that's not a $5 CPM. That's, you want to go to a $40 or $50 CPM on those, because you're really handing over the keys to your brand. But if you're selling to, if you're writing to an audience that's super health conscious, and you've got a great partnership with some meal company that makes a lot of sense for them, as long as everything is not spammy, they're probably not going to be terribly bothered by that ad, and you can hopefully make a nice ad sale there.
Brilliant. Great. So there was one question that just came in from John, and he asks, what probably will be in a lot of people's mind, what's kind of the lowest number of subscribers that you need to be able to go out and start looking for sponsors? And he kind of qualifies that with, I guess, probably the first place that you jump in, which is by saying his or the audience he's thinking of isn't tremendously niche. So it's not 500 lawyers or 1,000 lawyers. It's probably 1,000 college students or 2,000 college kids or something like that.
Right. So I mean, I'd say that, I have not seen there to be particularly lower bound. I mean, obviously it's going to get a lot easier once you're over, especially if it's not super niche, it's going to get a lot easier over like a 10,000, sort of threshold. And honestly, for general interest, yeah, I mean, if it's super general interest, it's going to be tough until you get into the 50, 100K plus range. But I've talked to, for one of my last media newsletters, I talked to a lot of small newsletter operators under 1,000 to 10,000, and there are plenty of people in that space making weekly sponsorship sales. And as I talked about in one of the early slides, like go to your audience first. Have that call out in your newsletter that says, want to sponsor this newsletter, and the person who wants to sponsor it is probably there. And look, maybe it's a $50 sponsorship, but at that size, that's an okay rate. And so start with your own audience, put together. You can just have that call out and an email address. You could create a very simple sales page that just gives the basics on number, list size, open rate, any demographics you have. Excuse me. And you're just starting from there. I think people have had a decent amount of success.
Totally, yeah. And something I've seen work quite well in that kind of situation is if you're small but you're growing quite quickly, then you can use that as an argument, right? So you can say, lock in, let's say 3 months or 6 months now at this price, and looking at the growth rate, this will become more interesting to you in 2 months, in 3 months. That's definitely one approach I've seen work well with other newsletters. The other is reaching out to these, to these potential sponsors and saying, look, we're probably too small for you to pay for something right now, but why not sponsor a prize for a referral giveaway or something like that? Let's build a relationship now, and if you see some interest there, then in a month or two, then we can turn this into something else, into a paid thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're growing 20, 30, 50% month on month, that's going to look great to a sponsor. It's great for them to lock that in then, and then they know they're hitting new people. They love a good growth story. So if you're on your SparkLoop and you're getting lots of growth, that's fantastic. And then when you're a little further along in the selling process, something like looking in a directory like ours, like who sponsors stuff, you can find other newsletter. You can look at those small newsletters and say who is sponsoring newsletters that are under 10K, and you can find them. You can sort by that, and you'll have sponsors who are used to dealing with newsletters of that size, and that is a good place to start pinging those people at the contact information you give you.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way to look at it. If there are people who are already sponsoring small newsletters, then a lot of the risk is taken out for you. It's an easy small step to kind of expand that to your newsletter as well, I guess. Awesome. So we have another question actually from Dan, and Dan, I'm just pausing this really quickly. Dan has an e-commerce informational site. So he gets a lot of visits each month, 6 figures of visits to his website each month. And I don't think he really has an email audience yet, but he thinks he can build one pretty quickly to about 50,000 subscribers. And he's trying to work out whether that's something that he should do. And I think his main question is, assuming he did build up and I'm not quite sure what an e-commerce informational site is, but assuming he did build that up to about 50,000 subscribers, what kind of return could he expect over a year from email sponsorships? And I guess a big part of that depends whether an e-commerce informational site is that affiliates, is that comparing Shopify to WooCommerce, is what is that? Is that B2B? How niche is that audience, I guess?
Right. So, I mean, if you're just putting kind of a passive sign up for our newsletter, I think you could probably really back of the envelope hope to convert 1% to 2% of that monthly audience into a newsletter audience over the course of a year. If you're doing a site, it might not be this one, but if you're doing a site where you can sort of gate and you have to register with your email to read the content, you could probably push that up a little faster. And then, then I would just do the math, figure out what your target CPM is. Say you wanted to assume a $5 to $10 CPM, assume the list size from converting 1% to 2% of your web audience, and then multiply that by the number of sends you would do. That'll probably give you a back of the envelope for what you could expect to make by doing that.
That's great. So, I mean, just thinking about the back of the envelope there, if we've got a couple of minutes. So he says the audience is e-commerce site owners, and half of them are small, but some of them are doing some significant revenue. So it looks like that could be a really attractive audience for quite a few people.
I think you'd get a good email, given that that's a little more targeted than I thought from the initial phrasing. I think you'd get a good conversion. These are people who are actively working on growing their business every day. So I think you'd probably see a little higher email list conversion rate, and then there's a real universe of companies trying to sell to e-commerce site owners, and so we can probably squeeze a decent CPM out of that.
Yeah, for sure. So I can't do the math in my head, but
Neither can I.
it's a good sign that I got stuck because it seemed to be quite big. So if you want to share the, do you mind skipping back to that screen where you had the formula on it quickly, and we can just highlight that again in case Dan wants to take a quick look.
Oh, the CPM, yeah.
Yeah, I know it's
Yeah.
I suppose he'd probably go for CPC actually but either way, yeah.
Yeah, I think either of those could work. So yeah, again, assume maybe be more generous. Assume you could convert 5% of your website audience. I do always still like to be pretty conservative about that because it is hard to get people to sign up for stuff. But yeah, figure over the course of a year about 5% of them became email list subscribers. Divide that by 1,000 times. I mean, for this, let's say a $20 or $25 CPM, which is probably not unreasonable. Then you can do the math from there and see what you think that would look like in terms of ad rates. It's also something where you could possibly be having advertisers run on a affiliate basis where you would get paid for every conversion if they, I don't know what the products are in your space, but somebody in your audience signed up for a SaaS product they were selling and you got 20% of their first month or 20% of their first year, that could even be more attractive than just doing a CPM depending on the math.
Yeah, I mean, I was just doing the math in my head there, and it seems like rough ballpark is on the low end a couple of $1,000s up to about 10,000 or maybe even slightly over that per month, based on kind of if you do a weekly or a twice weekly email with decent engagement on the list, obviously. Yeah, brilliant. Are there any other questions from anyone or any feedback, comments? Otherwise, while we're waiting to see if there are, Jesse, or maybe Ryan, you can do it for Jesse if he's still struggling. Where can people go and find out more about you? Obviously, over at Email Revenue Solutions, and there's still the discount code there for who sponsors stuff, which people can go and take a look at. But where else can they find you on Twitter, email? What's the best place to reach out if they have any questions? Or they'd like to?
The best way to reach out, our emailrevenuesolutions.com site has a contact form to get in touch with us. And I assume I think that's in the emails that SparkLoop is sent around also. And yeah, I mean, just check out whosponsorstuff.com. We're going to be launching that next week. And, it'll be open so that you can see what kind of sponsors are in there. And again, we have this launch pricing for now, and it's already discounted a lot off what we're going to be charging for the full year subscriptions, and an additional 20% for SparkLoop users. And that package actually also includes a strategy call. So for anyone who buys that, we'll do an hour-long strategy call with you to specifically go over your niche and your newsletter, and help you make a strategy to be successful selling ads with that.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps us up for today. Thank you so much. If you want to find out more about SparkLoop, by the way, you can head over to sparkloop.app, or you can shoot me an email, louis@sparkloop.app. This will all be, the recording will be sent out via email sometime in the next week. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Jesse and Ryan, thank you very much for jumping in and doing this for us. It's been really, really exciting, really interesting, and look forward to the launch of Who Sponsors Stuff.
Thanks so much for having us.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.